We're going to talk about another radio station that you worked at, and apparently you're not able to hold a job because you keep going to all these different radio stations. But
I was fired from every radio station I ever worked at.
I thought that was my line, but good.
It's
you
true.
know you're a veteran when, yeah. But you did, there's another seminal moment when you joined the first underground FM rock station in Los Angeles. The second one in the country, I believe, because Tom and Rachel Donahue started KMPX in San Francisco. Shortly after that, they opened KPPC in Pasadena. And tell them where the studios were located.
It was the third radio station that I was in. First, that KMLA, the college radio station, and KPFK, the listener-supported station. And then KLAC, and then finally KPBC, as you say, the first underground FM radio station in LA, which was located in the basement of a church in a little city called Pasadena, right outside of Los Angeles.
Which seemed unbelievably poignant and sacrilegious to some people and very holy to others, that this underground rock and roll, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane music is coming out of the basement of a church. It seems quite fitting to me. Much later in life, Tom Petty would write a line in the album The Last DJ in a song called Have Love Will Travel, where he talks about rock and roll. It does the same thing to them that Jesus does for you. And there you are in the basement of this church. Did you get a chance to work directly with Tom and Rachel?
No. I never met Tom Donahue, one of the great regrets of my life. I met Rachel, his wife, but I never met Tom Donahue, who was the tribal chief of underground FM radio. But I got to dance around the fire. And it made total sense to me that this radio station and that evolution of the broadcast experience would take place in a church, because it was church. And I believe you and I have discussed this before, that I've always felt that at least then the rock and roll performers were the apostles and the prophets. They were the holy rollers, and the Spirit came through them and touched us, the congregation. And the disc jockeys were the conduits that delivered the holy message. Now, its transformation was not as profound as the presence of Christ, not in my life, not in my heart. But in terms of the impact that music that we played in the 60s, in that format, which was no format, in the way that we handled the delivery and the experience, in the field of media, in the field of entertainment, in the field of the cultural evolution, in the field of the revolution of the times and everything else, was as significant and profound as any other step on the natural path. It was just an honor to be there and to be a little part of that experience.
And it was that moment where the words of Bob Dylan, the words of Dr. King, and the protests that were happening in the street came together at that nexus, and we were the community bulletin board.
Yes.
And it was the only place you could get that kind of information at the time, correct?
It is hard for people who were not there to imagine what the importance of FM radio meant in the lives of millions of people who lived through that period of time. It was not only a bulletin board, it was a vision board. It was the lighting of the candles, it was inspiration. It was, you knew you weren't alone. You knew you weren't crazy. You knew that others felt the way you did, that they shared your dreams, indulged and engaged in your fears and trepidations, and that we're all, according to Don McLean, a generation lost in space. And there were very few life preservers to hang on to keep you focused and centered. KPPC, later KLOS, KMET, a variety of FM radio stations here that I worked on, played on, moved through, danced with, advanced the concepts of the times that we lived through. And for me, it was joy, it was service, it was pleasure. The only regret that I have from it is that there were times I was reporting about stuff that was going on, and in the back of my mind, I wished that I was part of the stuff I was reporting on. It's one thing to report upon how things were doing at Woodstock.
Right.
It would have been another thing entirely to have been at Woodstock.
Without the tape recorder.
Without the tape recorder, without the microphone, just being, well, I'm not kind of a mosh pit guy, you know, but just being in the glow of the experience. Sometimes I felt that being the conduit, to coin a phrase that Baba Ram Dass uses, to be part of the experience, you have to relinquish the role of being the experiencer. The analogy, you're the surfer and you're on a board and you're just half a mile off the coast in Malibu and you're waiting for the wave. You're waiting for that great wave to bring you home. The moment the wave comes, you have to suspend intellect, or else you won't be able to stand up and balance yourself coming in. You have to give up the role of, I am the surfer, here comes the wave I'm going to experience coming into shore. You just have to tell the mind to shut up and float downstream. It's analogous to a woman having an orgasm. And her thing, well, you know, I've read the book and I've gone to the therapist and I've talked to my girlfriends and I'm ready for this experience. And it's about to happen. As long as she's processing the information, she's never going to be able to experience the sensation of surfing onto the shore. You have to give up the role of being the woman awaiting the orgasm. And it is that way in all peak experiences in life. I spent a lot of time in radio attempting to surrender the role of being the radio dude in talking about the experience that I was communicating. I mean, that's the only regret of the experience. The rest of it was just joyous. I loved being on the radio. I loved having, this is the greatest job in the world. I mean, you'd wake up at a reasonable hour, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You'd spend the day doing what you wanted to do, probably put together a set list of music you're going to play. In my case, I had a guy named Barney Kalin, who was the best producer possible in radio. I'd call him and I'd say, so who's in town, who's available? And he said, look, I think that I can arrange a phoner tonight with Mick Jagger. Elton's in town, would you like to talk to him? And Phil Oakes is doing a benefit concert. And by the way, we've got Alan Watts for next week in studio. Then I would go down to the Source restaurant, have a nice vegetarian late lunch, a glass or two of Chardonnay, hang out with a friend or two, maybe engage in some recreational behavior, drive down to the radio station, talk to those people, talk to the listeners, play a couple of records, leave at 2 o'clock in the morning, stop off at Dupar's, have a nice piece of apple pie, roll on home, fall out whenever I wanted to fall out, and they actually paid me to do that. You know.
Life was good.
You know, it's not that anybody voluntarily leaves those gigs.
That's true.
And, you know, what a way to live. And it gave me the opportunity to meet people who I listened to 10 years earlier. I mean, Jim, besides the obvious names, the John and Yokos and the Mick Jaggers and the Eltons and all of that, I interviewed Horace Silver. I interviewed John Coltrane. Later, I would spend an entire day with Carl Perkins, who I would represent, who I would arrange to meet with Bill Clinton. We would ask the president what size his shoes were so we could send him a pair of blue suede ones. I met, interviewed, and later would represent the people who I grew up listening to. This wasn't a job. This was payback for something that I must have really done in a previous incarnation that was very, very pure.
Yeah.
That's how I viewed the broadcasting years. They were grand. And when I pushed it to the limit, when I got a little too edgy, when I got a little, I don't know, either arrogant or loose or however I got, and I was fired for just being too much or maybe not enough, I always accepted the pink slip with grace, because I came away from it with far more than I could possibly have expected or wanted.
Right.
The radio years, the broadcasting years were just charms.